This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. The reality about the 2024 season for the Cleveland Browns is that it's not one of those seasons where we're just going to talk about as one cohesive year. We're going to break this season into two parts because this season is about a narrative versus the result of what happened in the season. Much like in 2022, where the season was split between what Jacoby Brissett was able to do, what Deshaun Watson was able to do. Much like last year, where the season was split between what Deshaun Watson was able to do, what everybody else was able to do. Much like in 2018, where the season was split between what Hugh Jackson was able to do and what Greg Williams and Freddie Kitchens were able to do, right? And they went 5-3 in that stretch. This season is going to be very similar. The first part of this season with Deshaun Watson is already written in the books. It was a spectacular failure. Even the most bearish people on the Cleveland Browns did not think that they would walk out of there at 1-6. That was crazy for the Browns to do, to be at 1-6. So that is that part of the season. Then Deshaun snaps his Achilles. And then you move on to this second part of the season. And the second part of the season is going to be evaluating what this team is when Deshaun Watson is not the starting quarterback. And if you are better than a 1-6 football team, which the Browns are one win away from proving that they're better than what they were with Deshaun Watson. So that's how this season is going to be viewed. What the Browns do in the second half of this season is going to kind of be viewed in a vacuum. How Kevin Stefanski is evaluated for this season is going to be really judged by what happens in these games at the end of the season. The same goes with Andrew Berry as a talent evaluator, right? How does Cedric Tillman perform in the second half of the season post Amari Cooper trade? How do guys who are getting time now in the second half of the season, like Michael Hall, continue to perform? DeJuan Jones at left tackle. Just think about DeJuan Jones, Cedric Tillman, Isaiah McGuire. Three players who are going to get a lot more time in the second half of the season than they did in the first half of the season. If those three guys work out, then all of a sudden the 2023 draft looks like an amazing win for Andrew Berry and the Cleveland Browns, because you would have three starting caliber players in a draft where you didn't have a first or a second round pick. That is tremendous. Like that's tremendous to get three starters in a draft where you don't have a first or a second round pick. So depending on how this season ends, is really going to determine how people, yes, but the people in charge of the Cleveland Browns feel about the Browns going forward. I want to make this point. Records are a destination, but the journey is what gets people promoted and what gets people fired. You can have a bad record, but if the journey makes sense to why you got to that record, you're not going to get a lot of heat about it. You have a great record and get fired because the journey on how you got to that record might get you fired. We see that all the time. We see coaches with bad records obviously get fired all the time. We see coaches with bad records keep their jobs based on what the journey looked like. Hugh Jackson got to keep his job after starting 1-31. Because the journey was obvious for why he was 1-31 at that time. And then we've seen coaches with good records get fired because of the journey. This is going to matter for the Cleveland Browns, how they close the season. The Browns have 8 games left this year. They play the Saints, they play the Steelers, they play the Broncos, they play the Steelers, they play the Chiefs, they play the Bengals, they play the Dolphins. Of all of those teams, the Steelers are the only division leader in that bunch. And I think the Broncos are the only other team in addition to the Steelers that are over 500. So it's not crazy to think that the Browns could win a few games down the stretch here. And it's going to matter, yes, how many games they win when it comes to the job security of Andrew Berry. But it's also going to matter how they win these games or how they lose these games, right? Because if you go through these 8 games and the split between Deshaun Watson, offensive splits, total yards, touchdowns, passer rating, all that stuff, sacks allowed, is just so drastically worse than what it is with Jameis Winston for the rest of the season, then it's going to make the problem obvious to identify. Now, some of you may be watching this video thinking, hey, Quincy, the problem is obvious to identify. And I would agree with you. I think the problem has been obvious to identify since week 4 in this season. But to people who have invested $230 million and 3 years of their time into this, you need this problem to be so obvious to identify in order to get something to be done about it that it cannot be ignored. They're not just going to go and make this very costly decision on a whim. They got to have overwhelming evidence. If the Browns provide that offensively, it's probably not going to matter what the record is at the end of the season because people would have had their main issue with this team addressed. Now, the defensive concerns, maybe you do something with Jim Schwartz, but I also think the fact that you've traded Zadarius Smith, you're playing younger guys, JOK's hurt for a significant portion of the time, people aren't going to be too harsh on if the defense has a little bit of a fall off in the second half of the year. Also, Myles Garrett's been playing with injuries pretty much this whole season. Maybe he comes out the bye week feeling a lot better, and we're talking about a dude who's just coming off a 3-sack game. So, man, maybe the defense doesn't even drop off either. But if you're able to win games or you're losing these games closely, but you're able to score a lot of points, I think people in the building at least will not have their eyes on firing Kevin Stefanski and firing Andrew Berry. Now, there's a world where you do win more games, but the offense doesn't look significantly improved. And maybe you don't fire Kevin Stefanski, but you do fire Ken Dorsey. I would also like to make this point too. I think it's going to be the case that the Cleveland Browns offense is going to be significantly better in these next 8 games than they were at the start of the season. Again, this conclusion seems obvious to me because if you look at what the Browns, just look at what Jameis Winston has done in 2 games versus what Deshaun Watson has done in his first, 6, 7 starts, it's a drastic difference in performance and in yardage for the Cleveland Browns. It's already drastic, right? Jameis is already over 50% of the total passing yards that Deshaun Watson has had in the 2024 season. He's at the same amount of touchdowns. His touchdown percentage is higher, but his interception percentage is higher, and he's thrown the same amount of interceptions as Deshaun Watson has. Now, Deshaun Watson in 7 games had 49 first downs and a success rate of 33%. Jameis Winston has 35 first downs in 2 games and a success rate of 45.4. It's not an amazing success rate, but it is much better than what Deshaun was doing in his offense, right? Yards per attempt is up with Jameis over a full yard, 5.3 Deshaun, 6.6 with Jameis. Quarterback rating, quarterback rating is up, 79 for Deshaun, 83.4 for Jameis in 2 starts. QBR is way up. Jameis Winston has a 61 QBR through 2 games. Deshaun Watson has a 22.2 QBR. The sack percentage is down. Deshaun Watson was at 13.2. Jameis is at 8.3. They're already on track. Like if Jameis has 2 more good games, he will surpass what Deshaun Watson was able to do in most of these statistical categories. In just 4 games, what Deshaun did in 7 starts, 6 full games, 6.5 starts. So I think they're going to be a lot better offensively for the rest of the year. If they're much better offensively, they should be able to win more games. And if the Browns finish the season 5-3, even though their record will be 7-10 at that point, I don't think people in the building, at least, I think fans are going to be furious no matter what, but I don't think people in the building will be furious about where this team is, and they will be less burn it down about where this team is. Now, if they finish just as bad as they started, so let's say they only get 2 wins this season, or marginally get better, 2-3 wins, and then anything's up in the air at that point, right? They could keep Kevin and be patient. I wouldn't be surprised by that. They could fire Kevin and not be patient. I wouldn't be surprised by that. But if you want the team to kind of keep everybody around, or if you're somebody who is wondering what would it take for these guys to get fired, I would say a lack of offensive upturn after the quarterback change would be something that would get people fired. Again, we'll see. They play Pittsburgh twice. It's one of the best defenses in the NFL. Kansas City also a really strong defense, same with Denver. So there's a chance that offensive production does not hit the same ways. But it's really going to matter how that lack of production happens, right? That's my whole point. I think the Browns, that's my whole point. How many games do you think the Browns will win down the stretch this year? Do you think they'll get 1 win, 2 win, 3 win, 4 win? I think the max the Browns will probably get is 5 wins down the stretch. They go 5-3 at the end of the season. I think that's in the best case scenario, unfortunately, right? Which is a 7-10 end to the season. But you can say to yourself, hey, we were playing 11-5 football with Jameis Winston. If we would have started him the whole way, even with the quarterback as mediocre as Jameis, we could have gotten to 11-6. This whole core shouldn't be turned down. We should really just focus on fixing the quarterback position. Now, if you go and you only win a game or 2 down the stretch, right? You finish the season with 3 wins, then, that argument's going to not sell as much, right? Especially if you don't do it with a decent point differential, right? If you have a tight point differential and your record's not what you want it to be, I think you can make the argument that, it was the kicker's fault or this and that made that happen. But if you have a good point differential and you finish the season 5-3, I think everybody's going to be relatively safe because it's going to be obvious what the problem was for this team. That's my thoughts. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.